You are listening to Explained, where I give you the lowdown on root causes and factors that have disrupted your health and what you can do about it. Mercury Amalgams Explained, how amalgam fillings contribute to chronic illness and what you can do about it. So this episode is for you if you have had amalgam fillings or you currently have them, and you want to understand their long-term impacts on your health and on your family. In this talk, I'll show you exactly how mercury amalgams contribute to brain health issues, gut health issues, your temperament, and your very sense of self. And this is a big deal because over 100 million Americans currently have or used to have amalgam fillings, which is almost a third of the US. But when you look at how amalgam fillings have actually been used for several generations now, and the body burden of these metals gets passed down from mom to baby, it's actually a far wider impact than you might realize. This is important because amalgams contain mercury. It's actually half the weight in amalgam fillings by volume. And even our own health government agencies say that there is no acceptable level of mercury in the body that does not cause health issues. No acceptable level. I feel the need to repeat that. So amalgams also contain, aside from mercury, silver, tin, copper, and they often contain cadmium and other metals as well. It depends on the material. This is a really weird thing to actually step back and consider, because if it's so toxic and there's no level of mercury that's actually acceptable, that does not create health issues for us, why are we still doing this? Why have we been doing this for so long? Well, it's because they're actually legally classified as a medical device, not as a material that's placed in the body. If they were classified as an implant or a material placed in the body, this would be a whole different conversation. But legally, that's how this has been perpetuated. And of course, the ADA owns the patent to amalgams and is compensated every time an amalgam is placed. So you do the math. We're still talking about amalgams in some dental offices like they are extremely durable. That's why they're a good solution. Long lasting, that they, can fill larger cavities, that they won't dissolve over time due to saliva and, basic wear and tear. That's not actually true, which you'll see in a moment. And it's really important to understand this. And they're still being posited as a durable, affordable option. But when you look at the downstream health effects, you'll see that the truth is anything but that. We really can't afford these. So I want to unpack this a little bit and how this actually affects the body. But I really want you to understand what happens once an amalgam filling is placed in your mouth, in one of your teeth. So within the first 7 years of a mercury amalgam filling being placed, half of that mercury evaporates into the body. It does this because mercury can actually vaporize in this poisonous, harmful vapor at room temperature and above. And of course, your mouth is a little bit warmer than that usually. And it's really, really harmful to the nervous, digestive, and immune systems. These are basically inorganic salts that are extremely corrosive to the skin, to the eyes, to the gastrointestinal tract. And oh yeah, they pass right through the blood-brain barrier and into the brain. They also love to get stored in your thyroid. And if you saw how many people come into our practice with thyroid issues, I actually don't think it would surprise you, because I think you're one of those smart people that's really on top of this and is seeing just how widespread these issues are today. So mercury doesn't just, when it starts mobilizing, gets on the move like that. It doesn't just bop around, cause some damage, and then head out the door. No, it does not. Actually, 80% of it stays in the body long term. Part of that is because it passes through membranes so easily, whether it's gums, the blood-brain barrier, the gut lining, and it actually does have a 32-year half-life in the brain. So we're talking about decades of impact here. And there's also a synergistic effect with other toxins. So it's not just mercury by itself causing severe damage and distress. It actually interferes with your ability to detox other heavy metals. So whenever you have mercury on board, it's much more difficult for your body to let go of things like lead or cadmium or even aluminum, which is technically not a heavy metal, but it certainly behaves like one. We'll have a whole bunch of episodes dedicated to that down the line. It also acts as an antenna for EMFs. And this is really important to understand, because if you have just a little bit of mercury in your thyroid, in your brain, because it's passed through the lining of your gums, it's now registering in your jaw and it's getting stored there, or it's down in your gut. When you're in an environment with EMFs in it, for example, say it's your Wi-Fi router or your computer, your laptop, the phone you're listening to on this, AirPods that you're listening to this episode with, please don't use AirPods. Please throw those out. We'll do a whole episode to convince you on that. Or even around just simple little EMF exposures like that we've normalized, the mercury starts to get agitated and causes more damage to the surrounding tissue than it would if it was not agitated by EMFs. It's basically acting as an antenna. So your EMF distress is actually a lot higher if you have even a little bit of mercury in the body. Now, I know you're going to want to get this stuff out of you, but let's just go through what we're talking about here and the kind of symptoms that you can experience before we start talking about solutions. So hang with me here because I think you'll actually be really surprised. If you know anything about me, you know that I love the mental health conversation that we're having in this country. I love that we are getting more and more versed every day with the experience that we're having internally and how it relates to our ability to show up in the world and be with each other and show up for our work, our loved ones, all of it. The problem is that conversation is still very isolated, as if it is mental health and not physical health, as if the two don't intertwine or overlap. And nothing could be further from the truth. Mercury exposure is one of the best examples of that, in my opinion, because mental and emotional symptoms of mercury toxicity are well known to include anger, anxiety, apathy. They've even been attributed to bipolar disorder and anorexia, even borderline personality disorder, bulimia, depression, feelings of discouragement or emotional disturbances, forgetfulness. That's right. I used to blame my forgetfulness on mercury. Irritability is a huge one. So is loss of self-control, manic depressive disorders, mood swings, nervousness, and panic attacks. Social phobias like shyness or excessive shyness and timidity, suicidal thoughts or tendencies. So what I think is really interesting about this is that in one family where every child has had mercury amalgam fillings, you could actually have 3 different behavioral profiles that are all getting driven by mercury toxicity, and they don't overlap very much. Like for me, I had wild emotional swings. I'd go from very, very shy and socially phobic, where I couldn't look somebody in the eye. I would hide behind Michael and put my face in his shoulder when I was at my worst. I remember trying to get through the checkout line, and I couldn't look the person in the face. I physically was terrified to do it. And I used to be a really outgoing kid. So it was really strange to be suddenly, not that many years later, a young adult that could not handle this. And then I would have these wild emotional swings, right? Where I would get very irritable, very easily overwhelmed, and go into these just instant emotional change. And I just could not handle it. It was very strange. Almost like I lost my ability to take in information and take in stimulus and actually choose my own response. It was like that ability was robbed from me. And I would just go straight into complete overwhelm, complete overdrive. And my overreaction would be like at a 10 for a stimulus that was at like a 2. It was really bizarre. So you could have somebody in the family that has a lot of irritability, easily angers, easily gets obsessive and over the top. And then you could have somebody who's very timid and shy, and they would both be responding to mercury toxicity. That's really important to understand. So I also want to emphasize here too, that this is so widespread that we have really normalized it. Like, for example, we know that the number 1 complaint coming into a doctor's office is brain fog. And the number 2 complaint coming into a doctor's office is anxiety. And they're also well-established side effects of mercury. And I'm not saying that that's everybody. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting that over 100 million of us have had these amalgam fillings? And so many of us are experiencing these issues. We are not alone in this. And that is something that I want you to hear very loud and clear. If you're listening to this and you're resonating with any of the symptoms that I've just explained, you are not alone in this, and there's plenty that you can do about it. I will say that I want you to be really responsible about this, because when we were first experimenting with detox and with how to heal ourselves from a DIY approach, we couldn't find any practitioners that understood this. We couldn't find any specialists that could even, accurately point this out to us. So Michael was listening to anybody that was experimenting in this field, whether it was toxicologists or specialists from abroad, and he was playing with different materials and he convinced me I needed to do this too. And I still had one amalgam filling left. I had had 6 put into my mouth initially. And I actually, looking back, can clearly see going from a very outgoing child to suddenly being much darker in nature, much more private, shy, timid, easily overwhelmed, easily upset, and carrying a lot of depression and heaviness. So that is really interesting to look back on. And I had had 4 of them removed in my early 20s, and they had been removed improperly. And I actually saw my health tank at that point, and I just didn't put it together because I didn't know what to look for. So I had had another one removed a couple of years later, and I was down to just 1 filling left. And I really didn't want to get this out. Michael kept telling me I had to, and I was really ignoring it. I was so traumatized by these like basic small things in my life. I really didn't want to put myself under that pressure. So, but I didn't want to get left behind in the detox. So I finally tried a couple of products that he was messing around with. He didn't have any amalgam fillings left, but we knew from scans at this point that we both had mercury toxicity. So we decided to give it a go. I took 1 squirt of cilantro tincture, just 1, and a handful of chlorella. And I immediately went into, it was almost a psychotic episode. I was standing in the kitchen at the counter, just taking these things. And I had to actually run from the kitchen into the living room because my overwhelming impulse was to grab at a knife and stab myself. I was in immediately so much emotional pain. All I wanted to do was hurt myself and die. So I ran into the living room. Thank God Michael was home. He came in and he held me down and helped me kind of wait it out. But this experience was so scary, and I was so grateful for it because it was like this feeling that I had had in the background for years, in like a 5% level, just this background noise of darkness, just kind of seeping in every once in a while, was finally turned all the way up to 100%. And I could see so clearly for the first time that this might not actually be mine. This emotional pain, this depression, this bizarre darkness, this desire to hurt myself that had started showing up in my early teens, coincidentally, not so coincidentally, when my first amalgam fillings had been put in, now I could finally feel it in a way that actually brought it to my full attention, to the forefront, in a way that was absolutely undeniable. So I tell you the story not to scare you, but to help you understand that mercury is something that has a deep emotional signature for many of us, and that it's so widespread that it's really tempting to normalize these things, but these are not normal. They are simply common. We really want to separate those two. And I also tell you this story to remind you that detoxing from mercury needs to be done very responsibly, ideally with the help of a very qualified professional. And very few people really intimately understand how mercury behaves in the body and how to safely get it out. So this really demands our attention and our respect, and our bodies will be so grateful if we take the time to do this the right way. So I also want to draw your attention to the fact that mercury toxicity is not just about mental and emotional symptoms. I mean, that's bad enough. Let's be honest. Like, this is really bad. We haven't even talked about how this has been linked to dementia and developmental delays and cerebral palsy and brain damage and autism and ALS. Like, it's really nasty stuff, guys. Parkinson's, MS, speech disorders, stroke, tremors. But it's also linked to physical symptoms. And these get glossed over a lot, which I find really frustrating. And I really want to help you unpack this. So you can think about this from several different baskets of physical symptoms when it comes to mercury. And remember, it does not take that much to kick off these symptoms. I mean, look at what happened to me. It was like just a few amalgam fillings, so tiny, just half of that evaporated in the first 7 years. And oh yeah, it happens to have a 32-year half-life in the brain. Okay, interesting. And then we have this beautiful cascade of effects, because once mercury is on board, remember, it's a lot harder for your body to let go of any other heavy metals. So the first basket of symptoms that I want you to consider for yourself is digestive symptoms, because mercury toxicity has been linked to everything from acid reflux to Crohn's disease to candida, colitis, constipation, flatulence, gastritis, IBS and IBD, leaky gut, nausea, and vomiting. So you could have just a couple of those. You do not need to check every box in order for this to be something that is a factor for you. So like for me, I was very easily nauseous. I had SIBO. I had constipation. I did not have and acid reflux, but I did not have colitis. It doesn't require that you check every box for this to be your originating symptom. In fact, for many of our clients, they've already done the homework by the time they get to us. We're not their first practitioner. We're like their 10th or their 20th, and they're smart. I love our clients because they are willing to take full responsibility for their health, and they are smart cookies. So they come in already aware of this to an extent, and they're ready to tell me, hey, like this one woman really stands out in my mind. She knew that she had had many dental issues as a kid, and she could not afford dental work until her 20s. And then she had 14 amalgam fillings put in at once. And within a year, she had serious digestion issues develop, which progressed into full-blown chronic illness until she finally found us and started detoxing decades later. So that is a really clear example. And she was able to, because there were so many of them, clearly point to, okay, within a year, less than a year, she knew something was seriously wrong with her, and she was not able to access real solutions that were safe until many years later. And maybe for you, you didn't have 14 all at once. Maybe you had a couple here, a couple there, and they just started chipping away at your body's ability to maintain itself. The good news is your body never forgets how to heal itself. It just needs really targeted support in the right order in order to unpack this and offload it. So digestion, that was the first basket. The second basket is skin. This is really common. We see a lot of acne, blushing, bruising, candidiasis, which is basically candida on the skin. So like you're wearing your gut on the outside of your body. It's very flary. Dermatitis is another example. Eczema, a lot of mole formation. That's really huge. Oily skin, and all sorts of just rashes that kind of defy description. They kind of come and go whenever your body gets a little full in its bucket of distress. And then they start expressing. Maybe you mobilized your mercury accidentally and you didn't realize it. There's something that you did. Like say being in a high EMF environment and not having anything to catch that mercury that got agitated as it got stored, as it came out of storage. So another big basket for symptoms of mercury toxicity is actually autoimmune disease. So that's everything from eczema, like we already mentioned, to fibromyalgia, to lupus, to MS. The effects are widespread. And then there's the basket that I like to think just basically called the senses. So this could be vision or hearing issues. So that'd be cataracts, deafness, floaters in the eyes, hearing loss, photophobia, which is basically a sensitivity to light. Like my mom would have a really difficult time in any big box stores where there was a lot of fluorescent lighting. And it wasn't until many years later that we figured out she got very agitated because of her high mercury burden, because the mercury in those fluorescent lights was basically vibrating at a frequency that it's almost like it calls out to the mercury inside your body at a frequency level and starts agitating it. It's really exhausting to be around. Tinnitus is another huge one that people don't realize can be related to mercury. Mercury can actually be the sole cause of that. What we often see for tinnitus, people come to us for that, is mercury, parasites, mold, structural issues, the whole gamut, EMF sensitivity, but mercury can just be the sole issue as well. Now, physical symptoms that we haven't covered are dizziness, drowsiness, chronic fatigue, my favorite, joint pain, kidney damage, sleep disorders, and thyroid dysfunction. That does include Hashimoto, so it does belong in that autoimmune basket as well. So I wanted to slow down for a second. And if you are resonating with this at all, I want you to make notes to yourself right now, right? And start thinking through your history and plan it out on a little timeline so that you can really see for yourself, when did I get these amalgam fillings and when did these symptoms start? Perhaps there was a confluence of factors, right? But mercury alone can be the starting gun. So the last thing I'll say about symptoms is we do have a little bit of an obsession with clearing out candida in the functional medicine community. And I understand why. Candida is a little bit nasty and has a lot of unwanted side effects digestive wise and fatigue and all these fun little sensitivities that come along with candida. But I also want you to draw the connection here for a second because candida, like many of our fungi and quote unquote bad bugs in the body, they're here to do a job for us. Candida is actually present in a healthy body always, and it helps to regulate other species when it is in its non-aggressive form in a healthy body. It only pleomorphs, meaning change form, into the aggressive form of candida when toxins are present, such as mercury and radiation. It can actually hold several times its weight in mercury, its own body weight in mercury. It's there to help stabilize you. It's doing a job. Your body is not stupid, okay? It is letting this happen. It is one of its few best options. The body will always prioritize stability. If I've got candida in my gut, there's a reason. And it's usually radiation or mercury. So if I've got mercury somewhere in a vital organ, my body's job is to get it as far away from the basic processes that is required to keep me alive. My body's job is to keep me alive. So it will try to shove mercury into storage somewhere away from our vital organs, or it will allow candida or something else to come in and help stabilize that for you. So killing candida, or by extension, any other unwanted bug that shows up on a GI map or a stool test or something, without understanding why it's there, can be very problematic for people, which is why we often get clients who have been crashed by other well-meaning functional medicine practitioners. Often, big name functional medicine docs, they mean well, but in the US, this is not widely understood yet. So please do not hunt and kill too early. Please look upstream. Why is this happening? And trust that the body is extremely smart and there's always a reason. And it's usually a pretty exquisite one. So we want to respect that and do this in the stages that the body wants it to be handled in, not what we, decide ego-wise or something. So I'm wondering right now, looking around you, I hope you are anyway, wondering if your loved ones and your coworkers and your colleagues understand this, because this really is so widespread that's actually affecting us at the culture level. If your mercury disrupts your body's ability to detox and contributes to myriad neurological and digestive conditions, it actually, all by its little lonesome, can be a major cause for us normalizing how common it is for us all to be sick and fatigued and weirded out and socially anxious and fly off the handle at each other in an ever more polarizing culture, right? Especially when you consider that we've been in this experiment for a long time. So we've been doing this for well over 100 years at this point. So our fillings can get passed on to our children, but what also means we inherited mom's fillings and grandma's fillings and maybe great grandma's fillings. It's a big deal. Just as our primary exposure of lead was actually mom in utero, mercury can still be our primary exposure, or our primary exposure to it can be when we are a fetus, if you don't have amalgam fillings yourself. So just consider that. And of course, we will, I feel the need to call out the elephant in the room. We will discuss vaccine adjuvants at a later time. We just got to take these one at a time. So let's just focus on dental amalgam toxicity today. So we know these stressors are impacting our being at every level, basically, right? What are we going to do about it? Well, I really want to stress that elements of responsible detox start with energy support. You always want to protect the mitochondria and help them to heal and become productive again so that your body has enough energy to detox and heal. Detoxing and healing takes energy. You also need to consider enough nutrient support on board before you do any type of detox, because you need to replenish our bioavailable minerals and our missing nutrients in order for it to be easier for the body to let go of mercury. One of my, just have to be honest, one of the things that I heard at a toxicology conference once that made me so angry, the presenter actually said to this whole audience of practitioners, the body is so stupid. It doesn't know the difference between a particle of mercury and a particle of iron. It will use it to make the nervous system function interchangeably. And I could not disagree more. The body's absolutely brilliant. It knows mercury is damaging, but it will use what it has to so that the nervous system can function, because you have to fire that electrical signal using a metal. And if you don't have a happy, healthy mineral metal in place, an essential one, it will use a non-essential heavy metal instead. So we have to understand that when you look at, remember our previous episode on glyphosate, where we've been stripping our soil and therefore, by extension, our foods of our essential minerals for the last several decades. We have to consider that we are undernourished, right? We are under-mineralized. And our well-meaning attempts to remineralize ourselves are often using trace minerals that are, honestly, the particle size is just way too big. And your body looks at that and goes, well, that's not food, that's just rocks. And now I got to figure out how to excrete it or store it, but I can't use it. So you want to be really deliberate and very sophisticated in your choice of how you remineralize. And so I'll give you a couple of options for that in just a minute, but I really want you to understand that. Actually, I'll just tell you now because I don't want you to stress out. My favorite way to do this is CT minerals. So those are completely bioavailable. They're basically pre-digested minerals, as if they had come through the plants that you eat or the animals that ate the plants, right? So that's thing two. And then you want to consider detox pathway support. So if your mercury body burden has shut down your body's ability to offload other heavy metals, and the scientist Boyd Haley really illustrates this quite beautifully if you want to really nerd out on this information. We know that we need to have extra detox pathway support in place to basically reopen the channels, our body's strategies that are already there to offload scary, yucky stuff. We have to support those and get the doors open again and get things flowing with ease, because our body wants to return to a state of flow. And when it's been exposed to things like mercury, it's the natural consequence is stagnation, and therefore all the fun pathogens and all the weird shit that comes along with that. So detox pathway support is essential. You want to phase that in very gently and deliberately, which is again why I suggest you work with a professional. And then, of course, you want gut support, because mercury is so good at distressing the gut in myriad ways for the long term. You're probably going to need to do some work to reseal your gut lining, to support your microbiome, to help gently rebalance itself. Keyword there, it wants to do it. Your body's smarter than you are. Don't just flood it with a bunch of, expensive probiotics and think that adding, a couple of strains is going to fix it. Because often that can just mean more work for your body. And you have got to prioritize bowel movements. A moving stream runs clean. And if you're trying to detox the stuff when you are not going multiple times a day, basically like trying to flush a clogged toilet. There we go. Okay, so then we get to the binders. So binders are a class of supplements that safely bind to toxins or toxicants like metals and hold onto them with a chemical bond that gets them all the way through the process of excretion. Like you may have even heard that, some materials are used for mercury excretion that I would never use because they're not strong enough binders, or they have toxic side effects, or it's a good idea at a hypothetical level, when you're looking in a lab, but we know because we're tracking the companies that they're not batch testing for cleanliness, and therefore their products aren't safe because they're getting exposed to all sorts of weird stuff along the way. And then you are taking a contaminated product. So binders are important, and using the right ones are important. If you're going to mess with this on your own or work with a practitioner that's not an expert, one of the places I would suggest that you start is something very gentle, like Amalga Clear from Quicksilver. You can find that on our site. You can also find IMD on our site, which is a really lovely way to start scooping up the mercury. Another one of my favorites is HMET, because that will actually expand. It will scoop up whatever is in the gut, but it will actually travel beyond the gut, which most binders don't do. So you have to consider how a product behaves in the body and if the body's in a position to use it. So those are my top 3 favorites, and we'll link all this stuff in the show notes, don't worry. And the last thing I will say about elements of responsible detox is that you really want to very intentionally consider mobilizers. Remember my experience with the cilantro? That's a mobilizer for mercury. And I was not ready for that because I still had one amalgam filling in my mouth, which actually was what got mobilized so instantaneously. But even if your amalgam fillings have been removed, whether properly or improperly, you don't want to have more mobilizing on board than you have binders to catch it. And you need all these other layers in place in order to responsibly support your body so that you don't do things like perks, which is basically a detox reaction, right? So I'm going to caution you to stay away from mobilizers, especially if you're working on your own. And I do want you to understand that some things that you might want to take for other reasons, such as melatonin and glutathione, are mobilizers of heavy metals like mercury. So you want to be aware of that, and you want to have binders on board if you're trying to mess with either of those, because they're phenomenal supports for your body, especially if your body is not making enough melatonin or glutathione on its own. And you need them, you need that external support in the short term for your health goals and to stabilize. But you got to make sure that you have something like the HMET or the IMD or the Amalgam Clear on board, ideally more than one. So this is where it all starts. Getting aware of what we have been exposed to, not just in our lifetime, but where did mom go? What was mom exposed to? What was her body burden before she got pregnant with you? And what are we handing down, right? Because this is a huge responsibility, especially if you understand just how the wide range of mercury effects that can be present between, the difference between how it shows up for you and how it shows up for somebody else. There's so many factors at play there. It's just enough to know that it could be wildly different. And it's so worth clearing this up and educating people. So I know you're going to ask, how do I find a safe dentist? And we recommend biological dentists. You can find them at iomt.org. However, I will just say with caution that not all biological dentists are created equal. I really want you to do your research. So we'll talk more about dental issues, in future episodes, but I think that's enough to get you started today. And I really hope you share this with your loved ones and make sure that they understand exactly where some of their issues may have started and what they can do about it. And be sure to check the show notes. Okay, I love you. Till next time. Thanks for listening. Go to detoxrejuvenation.com to find the links in the show notes to everything we covered in this episode. Please subscribe, review, and share with other humans who need this precious information. Let's help each other. Until next time, love, Sinclair.